Good evening and welcome to the stage of the world-famous Apollo Theater and the first official general election debate of the mayor's race. I'm Dominic Carter of New York 1. Tonight's debate is sanctioned by the city's Campaign Finance Board. The board is an independent, nonpartisan city agency which administers the campaign finance program, publishes the New York City Voter Guide, and administers debates like tonight. The program gives public matching funds to candidates for city office who agree to limit contributions and spending and provide full disclosure of their finances. To qualify for public matching funds, citywide candidates who have a minimum level of public support must, by law, participate in debates, which are sponsored by media outlets selected by the board. Tonight's debate is being sponsored by New York 1, New York 1 Noticias, New York City Newsday, and WNYC Radio. Not only is this debate being brought to you live on New York 1 and WNYC Radio in English, but in Spanish on New York 1 Noticias, in Korean on the Korean channel, and in Mandarin and Cantonese on the New Tang Dynasty TV. The second official debate will be broadcast on November 1st at 7 p.m. on Channel 4, WNBC. This debate will also be carried live, as I said, on WNYC AM 820. Now, our panelists tonight are Brian Lair of WNYC Radio, Sandra Endo of New York 1 News, Dan Janison of New York City Newsday, and Juan Manuel Benitez of New York 1 Noticias. We will now introduce the two candidates. Conservative mayoral candidate Thomas Agnabini. Democratic mayoral candidate Fernando Ferrer. We should also note that one other candidate was invited to participate tonight, Mayor Bloomberg. The mayor, the crowd, please, audience, please. The mayor declined, and by law, the mayor is not required to take part in this debate because he is not enrolled in the campaign finance program. The format of tonight's debate is as follows. Starting with myself, we will directly ask one candidate a question. The candidate will have 90 seconds to respond. The other candidate will then have a 60-second rebuttal, and then the first candidate will be allowed to have a 30-second response. The panelists and myself have the right to follow up our questions, which will not be taken out of the candidates' allotted time. The candidates will also have opportunities to ask each other questions. We will end this debate tonight with a series of lightning round questions, followed by 1-minute closing statements by the candidates. And I will begin things tonight with this question. Candidates, and beginning with you, Mr. Ferrer, since we are here at the Apollo tonight in Harlem, USA, we thought it would be appropriate to begin with an issue that's reemerged as a subject of discussion in the wake of Hurricane Katrina: race relations and racial disparities in America. We often describe New York City as one of the most diverse cities in the country, yet the reality is that we are often segregated by where we live, where our children go to school, where we work, where we go for medical care. Are there two New Yorks divided not just by class, but also by race?
Well, let me first thank all of you for inviting me to participate in this historic debate. I can't imagine anyone who would turn down the opportunity to headline at the Apollo. Now let me answer your serious question. When we're the only big city in America to see an actual rise in poverty, when we preside over a school system with a 50% dropout rate, when between 500,000 and 800,000 New Yorkers, many of them children, who are already eligible for health care coverage, don't have it, sure, we live in another New York. And we all have to work together. It's our responsibility to build one New York.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrer. Mr. Ognibeni.
Yeah, interesting question, because I think the problems that you talk about have probably been endemic in this country for many, many years. And I can remember stories that my parents would tell me coming here as Sicilian immigrants, how deeply they were discriminated against. And it's become a universal thing. But what my parents did, and many others, was that they overcame the discrimination that was placed against them, and they fought hard, and they rose up, and they were able to make sure that their children had a better life than they had, and hopefully their grandchildren would. Certainly there's discrimination, if anything, more de facto than there is de jure, because our society, through its laws and through its conventions, goes to protect all of those that are in the society. But if there are failures, if there are inequalities, those inequalities are not just a product of race alone, but they're a product of a social environment that I think those that are involved in that social environment have an obligation to change. White people are not responsible for the failures in many of the communities in the city and many of the minority communities. And I think there has to be more introspection in some of our minority communities and find out why there is such a dropout rate, why there is a lack of learning in school, why there is a high crime rate. There are certain things that really the society itself and the neighborhood itself has to overcome, and we could all help.
Thank you, Mr. Ognibeni. Mr. Ferrer, do you have a rebuttal to what your colleague just said?
Look, I think we all have to be concerned about building a New York that works better for all of us. That's the reason I'm running for mayor. You have too many people who are being squeezed out of the neighborhoods they've lived in sometimes for 30 or 40 years. Too many who can't find a decent place to live at a rent that they can afford. Too many who make the horrible decision that when they send their kids to a public elementary school, they're going to pull them out by the time they get to middle school because they fear they will be the one of two kids who drops out in high school. Yeah, we have to do better for all of them. We have to build a city that works better for every New Yorker.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrer. And now we turn to Brian Lear.
Thank you, Dominic. Mr. Ognibeni, just over an hour ago, Mayor Bloomberg and Police Commissioner Kelly announced what they said is a credible, though not fully corroborated, subway security threat, the first specific subway threat, they said, since 9/11. Under what circumstances would you, as mayor, tell the public about potential threats?
Well, actually, I think as a mayor that you have an obligation to alert the public to a threat. I think the public want to be informed. I think we're well advanced over 911. Of course, I might not make that announcement unless I thought that it was a verified, credible threat. Apparently, the mayor feels that it is. So I think it's important for him, if there is a credible threat, it's a good idea for him to hold a press conference and to make an announcement so that the public can feel secure in knowing that their police are responding to it, that the FBI are responding to it, and that the mayor is on top of the situation. Hopefully, that they'll bring the situation under control. I think it was just kind of sad that it happened to happen on a night where we're debating here, but these are things that are unavoidable.
The obligation of our police department is to protect every one of us. And if our police department has received information of a credible threat to our safety and security, it has an obligation to protect us. I think we have to wait for all the facts to come in and a full report by the police department and the mayor to every citizen of this city. But until that report comes, we have an obligation to keep the millions of New Yorkers who ride our subways, the 8.1 million New Yorkers who live in this city, safe at all times.
The Bush administration has gotten a lot of criticism over how it has handled threat announcements. Do you feel the Bloomberg administration has done better than Washington?
That's a very difficult question to answer because I think the circumstances are often different. We haven't had a credible threat in some time, but I think that both levels of government have been effective in protecting us. I think, of course, the real onus falls on the President of the United States to protect us, and I think that George W. Bush has been magnificent in keeping this country safe.
Thank you, candidates. And now we turn to... Excuse me. Well, there are no cat calls. We're going to... Audience, please try to keep the reactions to a minimum.
Although they make me feel right at home, I want you to know that.
Please.
Okay, we now turn to our Sandra Indo.
Thank you, Dominic. Speaking of the president, Mr. Ferrer, you've always pointed out and painted Mayor Bloomberg as being a staunch Republican, a staunch supporter of President Bush. Now, if he were always criticizing the president, how would that be helpful for the city? Also, given the fact that in Washington, the Congress is also run by Republicans, and we have 2 Democratic senators. So isn't it good to have a Republican ally here in the city?
Well, no, Sandra, that's why I'm running against him. Look, Mike Bloomberg likes to say he's a different kind of Republican. I presume he means that nobody gives to George Bush and Tom DeLay and all their friends like Mike Bloomberg does. But the simple fact is that all that giving hasn't produced a thing for this city. Hasn't produced a thing. Housing funds, transportation funds, health care funds, Homeland Security funds. Why, the federal government used to have the COPS program that paid for 900 more police officers on our streets. George Bush ended that. Look, Mike Bloomberg may call himself a different kind of Republican, but he hasn't been fighting like he should for the people of this city. Mike Bloomberg doesn't work for George W. Bush or Republican George Pataki. He works for 8.1 million New Yorkers, and he's got to remember that.
Mr. Agnebetti.
Yeah, I don't think that you have to be a Republican or Democrat as mayor of the city of New York to work for the people of the city of New York. We saw under our previous mayor, Rudy Giuliani, where he took stands that weren't always popular within his own party. But he thought that it was the right thing to do because he thinks New Yorkers put their faith in him as mayor and depended on him. The mayor is a different kind of Republican, Mr. Ferrer. He's a hypocrite because he claims that he wants to run as a Republican and usurp the value of the Republican Party, but at the same time he denies the value of the Republican Party and turns his back on him. I don't see him as a Republican. I see him as somebody who wants to usurp the system and use it for his own benefit. And in so doing, he's turned off Republicans in Washington and Republicans in this city and Democrats in this city and Republicans in Washington. If the man would take a good stand, a good faith stand on issues that are important to the city, it wouldn't matter if he was a Republican or a Democrat. But he doesn't take a good faith stand, and that's where he fails.
Do you have a follow-up to your colleague, Mr. Ferrer?
Well, the only follow-up I have is I'm sad that Mike Bloomberg isn't here to participate in this debate, because he ought to, you know, we have some criticisms. That's why Tom and I are running for mayor. And this was his opportunity to answer those criticisms, to make his case before all New Yorkers. I'm sad he's not here.
We now turn to Dan Janison for the next question. Dan?
Mr. Agnebetti, we've had a Republican governor since 1995 and a Republican mayor since 1994. Why do the city and state have such a heavy debt burden if the Republicans are the fiscally responsible party?
I don't think, I define a person by not what they call themselves. I think the mayor refers to himself as a rhino, which is a Republican in name only. And so too, although the governor doesn't use that terminology, that's what the governor is. These are people that got elected on the bona fides of running as Republicans. That means that they believed in reducing taxes, lowering the burden of government. They believed in social issues like pro-life, and they were against gay marriage. They stood up for things that mattered. Then they got elected and they decided that it was more important to fill their pockets or fill the pockets of their cohorts than it was to stand up for Republican principles. And that's why I'm running now, because I'm the real Republican in their race. We had a success in the city when Rudolph W. Giuliani was a mayor, because more than anybody else, he adhered to Republican principles. He fought crime, he reduced welfare, he reduced taxes. These are the things that define a Republican, not what you call yourself. And I believe that you will see the success of Mr. Pataki fading very rapidly, as I hope that the success of Mr. Bloomberg fades just as fast, because they have lied to the Republican Party about their real credentials.
Mr. Ferrer, a different question for you, if I could. The city faces a $5 billion plus deficit next year. You've proposed a couple of tax hikes, real estate speculation, stock transactions. That isn't the whole story, obviously. How might your way of closing the gap differ from the current mayor's?
Okay, well, Dan, let's get the first part of the question out of the way. You know that there's a whole lot more detail to it, but that wasn't the thrust of your question. I don't think it's right or frankly honest to put forward a plan to deal with the crisis we have in affordable housing, the crisis we have in our public schools, the crisis that we have in health care in this city, without saying what savings you'll make and how you'll pay for it. But here's the problem. Look, Mike Bloomberg is a celebrated businessman. And yet, next year, we face a deficit of about $5 billion. And that's a fact. Now, there are two ways to attack that. One is for Mike Bloomberg to do his job and to stand up to this governor and the legislature and require them, tell them they must assume the entire cost of Medicaid in this city. That alone, in the stroke of a pen, would end our structural deficit. And failing that, getting the governor and the legislature to start getting serious about Medicaid waste, fraud, and abuse that would help us lower that deficit by several billion dollars. Those are the strong steps a strong mayor who cares about not only the fiscal health of this city, but the actual health of all of its New Yorkers would take.
Any specifics on the difficult choices that you yourself alone, not relying on Albany, could take?
Yes, I've proposed a few of them. For example, in affordable housing. I've proposed something that Mike Bloomberg has failed to do in nearly 4 years as mayor. That is to close the tax incentive loopholes that give city assistance to real estate developers to build multi-million-dollar luxury condos. They don't need our help. Affordable housing needs our help. And I've also proposed something else, reclassifying the tax for vacant land that can be. You know, we're in the middle of a housing crisis. And everyone in this theater and everyone outside of this theater is aware of it. Dan, what we've got to do is, and I proposed, reclassify vacant land that can be used for building affordable housing. Instead of being land banked and speculated on, reclassify it to commercial, because what it is an investment. And then, excuse me just one second, I really want to answer the question, and we got plenty of time since we haven't got a third candidate here.
But Mr. Ferrer, I will let you quickly respond, but we have to follow the rules.
Sure, but I want to give Dan the answer he deserves. I want to give Dan the answer he deserves. I want to reclassify that vacant land not to collect taxes on it, but to encourage the building of affordable housing in this city. That's the point, Jan.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Agnew-Benny, your thoughts?
The mayor came here with a reputation of being a financial wizard, but the very things that are causing the overgrowth in our budget that's pressing us right now and causing this deficit are four things, basically: pensions, debt service, Medicaid, and fringe benefits. Of those, the mayor has a great deal of control. Fringe benefits, when you negotiate, in the pension you can create a fifth tier, Certainly with debt service, he committed the ultimate faux pas by refinancing the bonds that were used to get us out of the 1975 bankruptcy that we were facing. So he's made continual mistakes in expanding on those things that are creating the most debt. And when he was asked about it by responsible government watchdogs, he said that these were uncontrollable. The fact is that they're not uncontrollable. The fact is that unless the mayor gets these under control, his only solution will be to continue to raise taxes. We know from recommendations that have been made to us.
Your time is up, I'm
yes,
sorry.
All right, fine.
But before we go to Juan's question, I would like to ask you this question.
Sure.
You do understand by bashing the city's Republican mayor, you are helping the campaign of Mr. Ferrer. Would you prefer to see Fernando Ferrer elected than a fellow Republican stay in office?
I don't deem him a fellow Republican. I think he's just another liberal Democrat. And I'm running because I want to become mayor of the city of New York. And
But
if
Mr.
it means you ask me a question.
You dodged the question.
I'm not dodging the question. The question is I'd prefer me to be mayor of the city of New York.
Okay, but polls indicate that you're a long shot at best. If it comes down to Mike Bloomberg or Democrat Fernando Ferrer, who do you prefer?
Let me say this about why I run, because I don't fall into trap questions like that. Let me tell you this. I run because I believe in the principles I espouse. And there are people out there believing them too, and they're entitled to be heard. I don't care about the other two. I care about the people that support me and what I stand for, and that's what I'm here for.
Okay. I'll try it one final time. If it comes down to Bloomberg or Ferrer, who do you prefer?
I would prefer to be home with my wife watching TV.
Thank you, Mr. Agnew-Benny. And now we turn to Juan Manuel Benitez.
Ferrer is a much more honest man.
Okay. I do have to ask of the audience, please. I understand that we are on the stage of the world-famous Apollo Theater, but please, we have to keep the comments from the crowd to a minimal. Mr. Benitez.
Thank you, Dominic. Mr. Ferrer, last Monday, the president of the United Federation of Teachers, Randy Weingarten, said after reaching a tentative agreement for a new teacher's contract, and I quote, "This is a really good day for our teachers, our children, and our city." Do you agree with Ms. Weingarten, and would you encourage the union's teachers to approve the deal?
Yes, I do agree with them, and it's a shame that they had to wait nearly 3 years for a contract. And it was essentially because this mayor failed in one of his most fundamental responsibilities, to be at that bargaining table and negotiate with the president of a union on the basis of 3 things: what's in the best interest of the city, what's in the best interest of the teachers, and most importantly, what's in the best interest of 1.1 million public school kids. So let me simply say this. Not only do I agree and would I encourage a ratification of the contract, but thank goodness we have elections, because there is something that Tom Agnew-Benny and I agree on. We're both wed to educators. We were calling for better pay for teachers because it keeps good teachers in our system and it helps us recruit better teachers for all of our kids. Mike Bloomberg apparently was paying close attention to that, because a scant 5 weeks before the election, he's finally decided to do the right thing.
Mr. Agnew-Benny?
Yeah, I'm not particularly saddened by the contract. I'm sure that there are things in there that the teachers don't like and things that management maybe thought they could get more of. But as I looked at the contract, it was a contract that could have been entered into 3 years ago. And I think our children have suffered for 3 years, and our teachers for no reason except that the mayor was waiting for the appropriate political time, and I think that that's disgraceful.
Just a follow-up for Mr. Ferrer. Would you take credit for this contract, or part of the credit?
Well, I didn't negotiate it, but I sure as heck talked about it throughout this entire campaign. I put commercials on it because I believe in giving our kids what they need. That's why I was an original party to the action. After the plaintiffs, like Robert Jackson, member of the city council now, launched this historic campaign for fiscal equity lawsuit. We know, and we have known, that our kids, all 1.1 million of them, have been cheated for over 20 years. That had to come to an end.
Thank you.
Mr. Ferrer, a quick follow-up. The Bloomberg campaign, they have basically ridiculed you for taking credit, basically, for this teacher's contract.
Yes? What was your question?
And so the question is, can you actually claim credit for it?
Oh, come on. I think this campaign can claim credit for it, because were it not for the fact that we're facing an election with Mike Bloomberg in it, Mike Bloomberg wouldn't have moved an inch toward doing the right thing for 1.1 million school kids. By the way, firefighters are still waiting.
Quick rebuttal, Mr. Ogdenben.
Well, it's not in the way of a rebuttal, but I know that there were many people out in Staten Island who wanted the 4th precinct, and the mayor stonewalled them for 2.5 years. And they called me up and asked for my expertise if I would come out and give them some guidance, because I was an attorney and this was a charter issue and I was familiar with it. They invited me out there. I was out there on a Friday. The mayor announced on Wednesday they were getting their 4th precinct. So it's clear that the mayor responds to political pressure when he should have done the right thing from the beginning, and that's what's so disgraceful.
Okay. Now it is time to give the candidates a chance to ask a question of his opponent. The answer will be limited to 90 seconds and there will be no rebuttals. We begin with Mr. Ferrer.
Tom, you and I have some fundamental disagreements. That's natural. And one of them is on the issue of gay marriage. I support it, you oppose it. Our positions are clear. Question I have for you is, Mike Bloomberg has taken both positions almost simultaneously. He has said that he privately supports gay marriage and then chose to appeal a court decision that would have opened the way for it here in this city. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm saddened by it because I understand that people are going to have differences of opinion. I happen to think that marriage is a union between a man and a woman for the purpose of at least of procreation, that it's inappropriate for us to be talking about gay marriage. Although I understand that there are gay people out there and they're entitled to have certain civil rights, I think that's one that the sanctity of gay marriage should be, the sanctity of marriage between a man and a woman should be preserved. The mayor, again, is doing something which shows me that he doesn't have the moral courage to really lead this city. He wants to adopt two positions, gets the best of both worlds, which I don't understand. He is for gay marriage, but he's really against it. He wants to see gays get married in the city of New York, but he starts a lawsuit to make sure that they can't. I don't know where he stands. But that is not atypical of what the mayor does on many issues, and that's the problem that I have with the mayor. So I'm shocked. I'd have more respect for him if he just simply said, you know what, I believe in gay marriage, and that's the direction we're going to go in, and I'm not going to appeal the lawsuit. I may not agree with him. I hope many people vote against him for that, but at least they give him points for having moral courage. Now he doesn't have any points even for moral courage.
Mr. Ogdenben, it's your turn to ask a question of Mr. Ferrer.
What kind of arrogance does it take for a mayor of the city of New York who has to answer to all the people to not bother showing up at the first mayoral debate?
Well, in a word, although I have more words than that, I would say breathtaking. However, it must be nice to be able to spend $100 million of your own personal fortune on a re-election campaign and completely bypass the opportunity to present your case before all the people of this city. See, it's about the Apollo, it's about Harlem, it's about all of New York, but it's about something else too. Any mayor takes an oath of office to support and defend all the laws of this city, including the campaign finance law. The mayor, I believe, as the mayor and the chief magistrate of this city, had at the minimum the moral obligation to participate in this campaign finance debate, and I believe has the obligation to accept the challenge that I've laid out. We have 5 boroughs in this city. Communities want to talk about their future and want to see the people who would lead them talk about where they want to take their city. I think it's still incumbent on the mayor to accept my challenge of 5 debates, 1 in each borough. Let the people know who we are, what we believe in, and where we want to take their city.
Thank you, gentlemen. And now we turn to round 2 of our questions from the panel of journalists, and we turn back to Brian Lair.
Thank you, excuse me. Thank you, Dominic. And I think, Mr. Ognebeni, you get the first response to this question, and it's about housing. As can you hear me? As real estate prices continue to soar, gentrification is a double-edged sword here in Harlem and in many parts of the city. It makes neighborhoods nicer to be in, but it also forces people from their homes. Do you see the rising cost of housing as, on balance, a good or a bad thing for New Yorkers? And do you have a policy to help people keep their homes as neighborhoods change?
Yeah. No, I see it basically as a bad thing. You know, one of the things, I have the opportunity to travel around the city a lot. Even when I pass through in Harlem, I see a lot of construction going on. But I see that the people doing the construction are not the people that live in Harlem. And that distresses me, because if there are going to be jobs in this community, they ought to be taken by the people that can earn enough money to buy that house. I think if you're going to have affordable housing, see, one of the things everybody concentrates on is newer type housing. The kind of housing that requires zoning changes. It's called 80-20 or 70-35. And that's great for newer housing. We're doing some of that. But the biggest provider of reasonable housing and affordable housing in the city is the existing small property owner, the 20-unit and less. And what happens under the mayor's city, where he increases taxes dramatically, the tax rate, where he's increased assessments dramatically, where the cost of fuel has gone up dramatically, and now insurance with Katrina, what's happening is that we're doing nothing for this small property owner. But it's the poor to the middle class that are living in those apartments, and they're being forced out because the prices of rents are skyrocketing to match the cost of the operating of the housing. We have to do something to restructure 1801 et sec of the real property tax law and take those small properties out of tax class 2 so that we can control their assessments and control the tax rate. Otherwise, we're going to force hardworking people out of the city. I can tell you that I'm a hardworking middle-class human being, and I don't know that I'd want to buy or pay for the house that I live in now. That's how much it's inflated. And Mr. Cunningham, Mr. Mayor's office, said you ought to be thankful because the value of your house went up. That's sheer ignorance, because there's no cash flow. Because I'm not selling my house. That doesn't do me a benefit. What's costing me is the cost to operate that house, and that's what Mr. Cunningham and Mr. Bloomberg are driving up, and driving a lot of good people out of this city.
Mr. Ferrer, Mr. Ferrer, same question, and I would note that Mayor Bloomberg has said that the rising cost of real estate, the rising value of real estate, is on balance a good thing because it reflects the desirability of New York City. Do you agree with Mr. Bloomberg or Mr. Ognebeni, and how would you keep people from being forced from their homes?
Well, explain that to the tens of thousands of people who are being squeezed out of their own neighborhoods, out of the homes they've lived in for years. Explain that to the tens of thousands of New Yorkers who can't find a decent place. Now that may be good for real estate speculators, and that may be good for developers. But gentrification is hardly a good thing for existing, stable neighborhoods in this city. It's certainly not good for the New Yorkers who are finding the dreams of owning their own home, who are finding their own home shattered.
So what would you do?
Well, that's why I put forward a plan to build and preserve 167,000 affordable homes and apartments. We have a housing crisis in this city. When I was together with former HUD Secretary Andrew Cuomo last week on 95th Street and Columbus Avenue, we were in front of a Mitchell-Lama, middle-income apartment building that was going out of the program. And people might wonder, well, what's the problem? Well, across the street, they had already gone out of the program. And a man who lived there told me his rent is going up 700%. He and his family will not only have to move out of that apartment and neighborhood, but likely out of the city. That's not right, Brian.
Quick follow-up, Mr. Ferrer. Has it become too easy under state law for landlords to remove apartments from rent stabilization? And if so, how specifically would you change the law? Very briefly, please.
Well, certainly the threshold of $2,000 luxury decontrol no longer makes any sense. As everyone knows in this city, prices of rents are going up almost exponentially. We're going to have to do something about that to keep more people living in the neighborhoods that they have lived in for years and keep housing affordable.
Thank you. Your rebuttal, Mr. Agnew-Benny.
Yeah, I think that there's an opportunity, particularly if you work with the private sector, to build the kind of affordable housing that we need to keep people here. I know we use the term affordable housing, but I look at some of the things that are being built in the Bloomberg administration. They're not affordable. They're expensive housing, believe me. And I think that the only way that you can preserve affordable houses is to protect the small property owners, because that's where the bulk of the people live that need housing protection.
Thank you, candidates. And now we turn back to our Sandra Endell.
Thank you, Dominic. We've heard a lot of criticism of the mayor since he's not here tonight, but now we have to talk about... Let's now talk about some of the criticisms that critics have thrown your way, both of you. First, Mr. Ferrer. Some of your toughest critics have called you a political chameleon, a flip-flopper, on some core democratic values, such as the death penalty, abortion rights, and most recently the Diallo case. Is there one time, can you give us an example of one time where you went against the popular tide, went against what your party may have suggested to do or any kind of advice they may have had at the time, and went against what your supporters might say you should do?
Sure. It was 4 years ago, in October. You might recall that after 9/11, Rudy Giuliani was trying to overturn term limits and serve a third term in this city. In fact, he said if we all didn't agree to give him 90 more days, he would seek to overturn term limits. Mike Bloomberg took that deal. I said no. And I'll tell you why I said no.
But someone in your same party, the Democrats.
I'm sorry?
You said Mike Bloomberg took that deal. So I'm giving you a chance to tell us an example of when you went against the Democratic Party, a Democratic value, and stood up for something that may have not been popular.
Well, I want to talk about that later on, but I'll tell you something else. When I became borough president in 1987 for the Bronx, as you know, I became borough president in the aftermath of municipal scandals that ended up indicting and imprisoning a borough president who preceded me, a Democratic county chairman, and 2 members of the Congress. When I became borough president, I instituted one of the toughest codes of ethics of any political subdivision in this state. And among the things that I prohibited in my office was the holding of any position in my administration by anyone who held a political party position. And that was in direct response, not only to the scandals of the past, but in direct need of the people of the Bronx to know that their government meant to deal their cards face up, that we were to give people hope and confidence in our political decision-making, and none of our political decision-making would be guided by a political boss of any party.
Mr. Agnew-Benny. First off, would you agree with critics who label Mr. Ferrer as a political chameleon and a flip-flopper?
Oh, I'm not going to pass judgment on Mr. Ferrer. I don't know enough about his positions. I don't know enough where he stood. I don't believe, to me, that it's the kind of question that needs my response. I'm on the other side of this equation.
Thank you. But getting to some of the critics in this race against you.
Yes.
You've taken many positions on hot-button issues like abortion, the death penalty, and a citywide juvenile curfew.
Yes.
A lot of these positions, are they really consistent with the values and ideals and beliefs of New Yorkers in this city? And would you say that you're just a protest candidate in this race?
No, I'm not a protest candidate. I believe that a lot of those issues that you brought up, first of all, on abortion and pro-life, that's a deeply held religious and personal feeling of mine. I've never flip-flopped on that, and I've always held that belief. There may be people that don't hold that belief. That's what I stand for. That's what I believe in. With respect to the curfew, I have examined that curfew in over 1,500 major cities in the United States. If effectively used as a tool by law enforcement, you are able to reduce crime and protect children who are at risk on the streets. And I think if more people would have understood it rather than overreacting to it, I think it would have become a very popular view. I do things not because I think that they're necessarily going to be acceptable immediately. I don't do things because I think necessarily that they're popular. I do them because I think that they're right. And that's why I'm running, because I think Mr. Bloomberg is wrong.
If you're not a protest candidate, do you really have a chance of winning? Do you think that you'll actually win this race?
Yeah, my philosophy has always been this, and because people sometimes ask me that, what are your chances of winning? Should I vote for Mr. Bloomberg? And I always say that they're afraid of losing and wasting their vote. I always say that the only vote you ever waste is when you vote for somebody you don't believe in, just because you think they're going to win. The vote that counts is when you vote for what you believe in, and that's how you build a party, and that's how you build a movement, and that's how you stand up for what you believe in. And I kid around with a lot of people out there who are Jet fans and Giant fans, and I ask them why. They say, that's my team, and I ask them, why don't you root for the New England Patriots? They win every year. And they think that that's silly. And to me, it's just as silly to vote for Michael Bloomberg if you don't believe in anything he stands for, just because you think he has $100 million to spend. And maybe people ought to start voting and believing in the people that they can identify with socially, economically, and politically. Because when I speak, what I say is what I believe.
Okay, thank you. Just for your rebuttal, do you agree with the critics that say that Mr. Ognebetti is a protest candidate, Mr. Ferrer?
No, but let me tell you what's guided my life in public service, 25 years of it. And it's one principle and one principle only, that every New Yorker deserves the tools to build a good life right here in this city. That's the thing that's been the foundation of every moment of my public service.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrer and Mr. Ognebetti. I'd like to, Mr. Ferrer, before we go to Dan Janison, just follow up on something that the mayor raised yesterday in the Blue Room at City Hall, in which he declared on his own, unprovoked, basically said that you did absolutely nothing as your tenure as the president of the borough of the Bronx. And then the mayor went on to say that things got remarkably better the moment you left and a new borough president came into place, as well as a new mayor.
Well, you know, Dominic, I'll let the people in this theater from the Bronx answer that question. Now, I am always loath to pick on a guy over much who isn't here. But he should have been here if he was going to make a comment like that, because there's one man in this audience with whom I worked when I was borough president, one of two mayors, and scores of community organizations to build affordable housing, 66,000 units of it in the Bronx, and that man is David Dinkins.
Thank you very much.
Mike Bloomberg not only should know better, he should be ashamed of himself for saying that.
Thank you very much. I didn't know that we had the presence of one of our former mayors here tonight, Mayor David Dinkins. It's so nice to see you. Thank you, Mayor Dinkins. And so now we continue with Dan Janison.
This is for Mr. Ognebetti. The current mayor proposes that the NYPD be put in charge of disasters in major transit facilities. And at least one critic has said publicly that it's moot because a major catastrophe would bring federal troops. The mayor has argued that the PD is the best equipped in terms of hierarchy and troops and so forth. What's your view on the mayor's reliance on his police commissioner and the expansion of the police commissioner's role as emergency coordinator?
Well, this is a serious issue and a sensitive issue. I happen to put my faith in the fire department, but I understand how the mayor feels. See, one of the things, I know when we had the 9/11 hearings and I listened to Rudy testify before them, and one of the things I think we need in the city, which has been missing for some time and has been depleted, is a strong Office of Emergency Management. And I think when you have a strong Office of Emergency Management, then you will have the kind of leadership that will obviate the need to go to the police department. I think, unfortunately, turning over the police creates and exacerbates a lot of intra-uniformed rivalry. And I have my doubts whether there are certain things that the police could do that could not otherwise be done better by the fire department. I feel much better if we organized and strengthened OEM and had somebody like when I was in office as a councilman, Jerry Hauer, who I thought was a fantastic director of OEM. And I think that's what the mayor ought to concentrate on, rather than pitting one uniform service against another.
How do you feel he's pitting the two against each other? I mean, he is...
Well, I've listened to the testimony, and there seems to be some deep concern from the leadership, particularly of the fire department in the city of New York, that the police department are better suited to handle these kinds of emergencies that we unfortunately experience. So obviously there's problems. I think if there was a third civilian agency that was capable of coordinating it, it would obviate those problems.
Do you think you had that under Giuliani? Do you think you had that situation under Giuliani?
I thought we had a better situation.
Blend of coordination?
I even think the mayor said that obviously it could have been done a lot better, but I think that that was the format that I think would be best served, and we'd have to strengthen OEM.
Mr. Ferrer, do you feel we had a better format under Giuliani in terms of emergency coordination, and would you restore it?
Well, first of all, the voters of this city decided that issue in 2001 when they empowered the Office of Emergency Management to the commissioner level. But if there's anything that Hurricane Katrina reminded us of, it's not only the role of the federal government to respond to disaster, natural or man-made, but it's the responsibility of local government as well to leave no one behind, to preserve and protect life. People of this city decided, and I think they were right, that an Office of Emergency Management, led by a commissioner, under the direction of a mayor, needs to coordinate all responders, to prepare ourselves for any disaster, and to preserve and protect life. Look, I know Ray Kelly and I happen to like him. He does a lot of things, but he can't do everything. That's why you have a Commissioner of Emergency Management, and that Commissioner of Emergency Management has to get this city ready for disaster and has to coordinate all responders to keep us safe, to preserve and save life.
Do you agree with Mr. Agnebenny that you would lean more toward the fire department as like in hazmat circumstances, for example?
Well, if the specific question is about hazmat, let me tell you something. The fire department has had training in it over the years. They are the experts in it. Of course, I would give that back to the fire department. Every agency has an important role to play. And it's only that one person, under the direction of the mayor, the Commissioner of Emergency Management, that can make all those responders help the people of this city survive any emergency, survive any disaster. That's the mayor's job. That's the Commissioner of Emergency Management's job.
Mr. Agnebenny, as mayor, it sounds as if you would not keep Ray Kelly as commissioner. What do you think of Mr. Ferrer's respect for him? What do you think of his role?
I think there's something odd that went around somehow, that somebody said that I dump Ray Kelly as commissioner. What I had answered was that I don't think it's appropriate for me, not having been elected yet, to make selections about who my commissioners are going to be. I worked with Ray Kelly when he was the commissioner last year under David Dinkins, and he was extremely helpful. I got a great deal of respect for Ray Kelly. Whether or not I would hire him in an Agnebenny administration is something that would have to be determined after the election. But I felt very bad when it was interpreted somehow that I was against Ray Kelly or somehow down on Ray Kelly. It never was my intent.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now we turn to Juan Manuel Benitez for the next question.
Thank you, Dominic. Mr. Ferrer, many immigrants report having difficulties when seeking medical care at city hospitals. It seems translation services are inadequate, and non-English speaking patients have trouble understanding their diagnosis or treatments. In some cases, decisions are made without patients' consent. Do you have a specific plan and budget to improve healthcare for immigrants?
Well, the interesting thing is, and I know something about this, Juan Manuel, and I'm not alone in this experience. As a kid going with my grandmother, who spoke little English, to a hospital emergency room and having to translate for her to a doctor, and having to translate back important medical instructions. When I was a councilman in 1986, I passed the first law that required interpretation services in hospital emergency rooms. And I see in the front row of this audience another member of the City Council who perfected that law, Council Member John Liu. I point that out. I point that out because this isn't a suggestion anymore. This is the law in this city. It's the mayor's job to enforce the law and ensure that everyone who presents him or herself for care, speaking any language, gets that care while in our custody.
Mr. Ogdenbenny?
Yeah, I remember doing the same thing, and my sense has always been this, that the one element that binds a country together and makes it a nation is that there is a commonality of language, an ability to communicate in a common language. And I think that we spend too much time defeating that purpose. I don't think there should be any laws that require anybody to speak any other language than English, because English is the language of America. And if you want to do business in America, if you want to live in America, you have to make the supreme effort to learn English.
Mr. Ogdenbenny, but do you think that's a reality? Do you think that's a reality in New York City hospitals?
I think that we've gotten away from people having the requirement to learn English. I went to the hospital and translated for my parents, and many people do it. And I know people come here from Eastern Europe who don't speak one word of English and have never complained, and their children go in the hospitals, go into my office, and they translate and explain, and the parents learn English. And if you want to assimilate into American culture, if you want to become the great American dream, the most important thing you have to do is acquire the language, and that language is English.
I'm sorry, just a follow-up question then. So, just the immigrants...
Wait until they stop, please.
Just the immigrants from Eastern Europe are the only ones who are not complaining about this? Do you think, just because of that, do you think that this is not a problem?
No, I only pointed out that there are people who had difficulty with language that found ways of communicating and learning English, so I don't think that it's any problem to be done universally.
Okay.
I don't think there are people in this world who have less of a capacity to learn English.
Any reaction to that, Mr. Ferrer?
Well, it's obvious I disagree with it. In something as important as health care, let's be even more specific, emergency health care. Why are we even discussing a right to have access to it by someone who doesn't speak English? We're talking about health care here. We're talking about what's right.
Thank you. Just one more quick follow-up, Mr. Ferrer. So do you have a plan and budget to improve the services that they already exist?
I know you asked that question before, Juan Manuel. My plan is to enforce the law as it already exists.
Okay. Thank you, candidates. And just for the audience, so that you're following us, what we're doing right now, we're going to go through one more round of questions from the journalists here, and then we're going to let you ask each other a question again, and then we're going to move to the lightning round, where I have a stack of questions here in which you will only, and I think I will enforce this, you will only be permitted to answer yes or no. So let's go through one more round of questions and continue. Brian Lair.
Thank you, Dominic. And gentlemen, my next question is about jobs. Mayor Bloomberg touts his economic development record, in which he lists 60 construction projects in all 5 boroughs. And yesterday he announced a major apprenticeship program with Congressman Rangel at his side, in which the construction trade unions agreed to open their doors much wider to people of color. What specifically are you proposing that would do better than the current mayor's record at creating jobs for the people who need them? Mr. Ogdenbenny, it's your turn.
Yeah, I think we have a couple of economic engines that can drive that. First of all, the biggest is downtown Manhattan construction, and that's something that the mayor has completely forgotten about. The second one is the far west side of Manhattan, where I think there are available construction jobs, great opportunities for retail development. But what I'd like to see more than anything, and I would do this in conjunction with education, because I think the kids in high school have kind of lost interest. There are a lot of emerging industries, and I know it's difficult to identify which ones are going to be successful and which ones aren't. But we have to do what's necessary not only to attract those industries to New York City, but to also work in collaboration with them so that the skills that are required to get a good job in those industries are taught in our public high schools. Now, I'm a trustee of a Catholic high school in Queens, and we have a Cisco Academy, we have a Microsoft Academy. We're the only one in New York City that has it. Kids go in there, they learn in high school skills that they could go right out into the public sector and get a job, $50,000 to $75,000 a year. So we have to have a collaborative effort, but we have to identify by sector those industries that are willing to relocate to New York and find ways to attract them here.
Do you have sectors in mind at this time? Well,
there are some new growth sectors. Certainly, the manufacturing sector is one that I think that we could bring back to New York, where there would be a proliferation of jobs. Ports and piers, rebuilding our ports and piers are another one. Biotechnical industries. There are many that I think would love to relocate to New York City. And I think we have to diversify, and I'll tell you why. There's going to come a time when the biggest industry that we have, and that's the financial industry and the stock industry, is going to relocate.
Do you give the mayor credit for these 60 development projects that he has?
Yeah, I think that that's a step in a positive direction. I have no problem with doing those kinds of things at all.
Mr. Ferrer.
Well, Brian, if there were 60 affordable housing development projects or 60 school construction projects, I might feel a whole lot more sanguine about this. But let's not gainsay 60 development projects. And in spite of the fact that this comes less than 5 weeks before the election, I think this is a positive development. And I'm going to say that. It is a positive development. And I give an enormous amount of credit to the man that Mike Bloomberg selected to chair this some months ago, Congressman Charlie Rangel, who has fought this battle not for months, not for a year, but for decades. But the real problem here is there is no framework for inclusion in this city that will break the back of chronic unemployment, of exclusion. That's why, you know, I look at chagrin at this mayor's record of including, for example, small businesses in doing business with the rest of the city or with other small businesses that do business with this city. And in point of fact, his record of inclusion for minority small businesses to do business with the city is not much better than his predecessor, Rudy Giuliani's.
So how would you create more jobs if this unemployment problem is chronic, as you say?
It is, and it's not only me that's saying it. However, how do you solve it? You begin to solve it by understanding the nature of it. There's a skills gap in this city. So many who fell out of our high schools, dropping out, on some street corner, no diploma, no skills to secure for themselves a good economic life in this city. So we've got to close that skills gap. We also have to produce the kinds of jobs at the local level that'll bring down unemployment. So here's what I proposed. Having the city begin a business matching program with small businesses that can do business with this city, minority and women-owned businesses that'll help us bring down unemployment. Extending those opportunities for them to not only do business with the city and other small businesses that do business with the city, but also giving them access to capital, something that they desperately need in order to ramp up. Stopping the enormous ticket blitzes that are driving so many of them out of business. In the last year, 10,000 of them, small businesses, having to close their doors. In the last 4 years, 25,000 small businesses. We got to treat small business, which employs half of our private sector workforce and is over 90% of all business in this city, better in order to use them as our partner to bring down unemployment and help us close the skills gap.
Thank you, Mr. Ferrer.
And your rebuttal, Mr. Agnabeni.
No, I have no disagreement with what Mr. Farrar said. I will say one thing, though, which I will agree with him. One of the things that the mayor has overlooked in the process of his development is that he's caused a lot of overdevelopment right within our residential communities. And there are many fine communities that exist in this city, in my community, and all over, in which he allows the kind of development that overcrowds our schools, that destroys the peaceful, quiet enjoyment of our community and the neighborhood and residential nature of our community, and I'm appalled by it. And he's allowed it to go on. And he invents things like the Growth Management Task Force, which is illusory, which simply looks at the problem and doesn't do anything. And the first thing that I do is I'd have a moratorium on building in residential communities till we could figure out a zoning plan that protects our communities.
Thank you, Mr. Ognibeni and Mr. Ferrer. And now we turn back to our Sandra Indo.
Thank you, Dominic. Mr. Ferrer, you're facing an opponent who's a billionaire, who can spend almost a limitless financial resources on his own campaign. Why is it wrong of the mayor to be able to spend however much of his own money on his own campaign?
It's absolutely not wrong for him to spend his own money on his own campaign. I have no quarrel with that. He earned it honestly. He can spend his own money any way he wishes. However, my argument with him is that he can't spend our money any way he wishes. When he tried to give $1.2 billion of our money away for a West Side Stadium for an NFL football team, he can't spend our money any way he wishes without getting serious about affordable housing and good schools and good jobs. That's my argument with this mayor.
Okay, just getting back to campaign finance spending. You're taking a lot of contributions from various people for your own campaign to fund it and to run a credible campaign. Aren't you beholden then to so many interests and a variety of special interests then?
Look, let me tell you something. Mike Bloomberg hasn't sent a contribution my way, and he can certainly afford to. But I don't think anyone who has known me in public service, as a borough president or a member of the city council, has ever questioned one simple fact about my life. Once I take my oath of office, my only fidelity is to the people I represent. Period, paragraph, end of story.
Now, Mr. Ognibeni, in the last campaign for mayor, the Campaign Finance Board chair said that Mark Green spent $16 million on his campaign and had enough money to get his message out. When is there a level playing field? Do candidates have to match each other dollar for there to be a level playing field? And is there a time when message beats money?
I don't know, and apparently the mayor is proving otherwise. I'm very uncomfortable because the mayor always says that what he does is he eliminates the special interest in government. And when you think about it, he's the quintessential special interest in government. Nobody can match this guy's money that he's spending. Now, we have a Republican form of government, I mean a small r. And what it means is that you don't run in a democracy, you don't run, that you find a candidate that you want to support. That's what we encourage people to do. And after we encourage people to do that, we tell them that they can't spend as much money as the mayor spends on me. We limit the amount of money that they can contribute, but we allow the mayor to spend as much as he wants. And the fact is, the reason the mayor isn't here, which shows you how terrible his money is that he's afraid to answer questions. He doesn't have the guts to stand up here and answer questions. He wants to define himself with these glossy magazines that he sends to my house, 2 or 3 a day. He wants to define himself by going on TV and having his own commercials. I saw in one commercial he said, Michael Bloomberg cut property taxes. And you in the press let him get away with it. The fact of the matter is that he is the one that is abusing the system. He is the one that's the special interest, the quintessential special interest, that's ruining the political landscape in this city.
But do you think candidates that take millions of dollars, on the flip side, do you think that candidates that take millions of dollars in contributions aren't beholden to anyone when they take office?
Say it again, honey.
When a candidate takes millions of dollars in contributions, who are they beholden to when they take office? Variety of special interests?
The point is this. There are people that give you money because they believe in what you stand for. And as long as you don't change your positions, as long as you believe in what you said you were going to do and stand for that, then there's no conflict of interest. The conflict of interest comes when Mr. Bloomberg says that, well, you know, there's no conflict of interest in my administration, and then Dr. Ross' friends buy up all the property around the Jet Stadium, and nobody says anything. That's a conflict of interest.
Mr. Ferrer, a response?
Yeah.
Rebuttal?
You know, I find this line of questioning very interesting because it is true Mike Bloomberg funds his own campaigns. But if you're going to talk about his being beholden to anybody, he's been beholden to Republican George Bush. He's been beholden to a Republican Congress. He's been beholden to Republican George Pataki. Give me a break.
Mr. Ognebeni, a quick follow-up before we go to Mr. Janison.
Yes.
You just said that Mayor Bloomberg is not here because he's afraid to answer questions. Well, if he is afraid, then why is he doing 2 other debates?
Because I'm not going to be at those 2 other debates. The reason he's not here is because he wanted to keep me out of this debate. Because he's afraid to face a real Republican. Because he doesn't want to get up on the stage and answer questions when he has to answer to me. And I have a letter in my pocket that he wrote as late as October 4th, the campaign finance, demanding, even though he said he was out of it, he was still demanding that I not be allowed to participate here. Now, why does he care if he's not going to be here that I'm going to participate? It's because if they would have thrown me out, he would have shown up here tonight. He's done everything in his power to cut off legitimate debate within the Republican Party. He says he wants a broad tent, he doesn't. The conservative Republican wing of the Republican Party, he wants to throw out the window and in front of the bus. And I'm not going to let him do that. And that's what he wants to do. And he threw me off the ballot, and he came after me with lawyers that he paid thousands of dollars to, and he's afraid to get here and face me.
Okay. Thank you. Do you have a rebuttal, Mr. Ferrer? Quick rebuttal?
Sure. $100 million in a political campaign buys a great many things. Buys an awful lot of airtime, a lot of mailing, a lot of advertisements and posters, but it can't buy 8.1 million New Yorkers.
Okay. And now we turn back to Dan Janison.
I'm just following up on an issue that was raised before. For both of you, starting with Mr. Ognebeni, why have response times to fires increased, and do you see any circumstances that might justify closing firehouses, given the fact that the mayor made the argument that they were based on a 19th century plan and so forth?
I have always believed, and not just because my brother-in-laws and father-in-laws are firefighters, but I always thought that the quintessential evidence of the people, the government's commitment to the people in the community is not just the police station, it's the firehouse and the first responders. And I firmly believe that. And why he attempted to close the firehouses when it would cost only $11 million, when he was willing to spend a lot more on what I consider much more frivolous things, just simply appalls me. And I think it had to do with a personal conflict that was between one of his deputy mayors and some firefighters. But I will tell you this. He said that he wouldn't open up Engine Company 293 in Richmond Hill, and he insisted on it till he went up to Joe Bruno and he wasn't going to get his budget, and they opened it up. And he went out in Staten Island and said he'd never manned the Rossville Firehouse. And I was invited out there one day with Jimmy Otto to speak about the Rossville Firehouse, and a week later he opened the Rossville Firehouse. So it was a political decision that he had to close firehouses. And let me tell you, anytime you make a political decision to put people's lives at risk in the community, you are not a good mayor. You should never close firehouses.
Knowing how unpopular, just to follow up, knowing how unpopular doing something like that is, I find it hard to classify it as a political decision.
The mayor, I firmly believe that the mayor had a deep and abiding lack of respect for the uniformed services, and I believe that was part of what I consider, although denied by others, his extremist left-wing ideological views about government. And he could not deal with them up front. They would not kowtow to him, so he took the best route. Just as he's done with the police and cut us by now 6,000 to 7,000 police officers that you and I paid the Safe Streets, Safe City money for, and he's cut that. He wanted to cut the firehouses and the fire department down. He couldn't do it because the people in the communities responded, and that's why he did it. Yes, it was political. It was part of his political ideology.
Last follow-up on that. What frivolous things would you have cut to make $11 million worth of savings?
I would have cut the $20 million we're spending to translate into 11 languages in the hospitals.
Mr. Ferrer, what's your response to the proposed cut?
Firehouses. You know, fairly early in my tenure as borough president of the Bronx, Ed Koch proposed closing a firehouse in my borough. It was Engine Company 41. David Dinkins became mayor, and we kept it open. Engine Company 41, a firehouse that was deemed unnecessary, lost 6 firefighters in 9/11. It was necessary enough to respond to that emergency and to emergencies all around the neighborhood. Let me tell you something. State Senate conducted hearings on the adequacy of fire protection and fire response, and they determined that fire response went up because of the closings of these firehouses. I think we owe the people of this city better, certainly in terms of fire protection.
Mr. Agnew, last word on the issue?
No, I think I've had everything that I'm going to say on that issue.
Thank you.
Mr. Agnew, just so that I'm clear here, did I hear you correctly that you said you believe the mayor closed firehouses because of a battle with his deputy mayor?
No, I think Mr. Shaw originally made the statement and set the confrontation in motion when he said 95% of the time firefighters sit around and do nothing and just respond. And I don't know what the breakdown is, but obviously they're the kind of people, like military people, they aren't expected to be on duty 24 hours a day and active, but they're there to respond. And so it was a selfish statement on the part of Mr. Shaw. Some firefighters did call him up and said some things that weren't appropriate. And I think that set a chain of events in motion where the mayor allowed his personal vindictive feelings towards the fire department to result in the closure of the firehouse, and I thought that was wrong.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And now we turn to Juan Manuel Benitez.
Thank you, Dominic. Mr. Ferrer, the Witt Clinton High School in the Bronx was recently equipped with metal detectors in response to an increase in violence at the school. There's also a ban on the use of cell phones and other electronic devices. Do you think these measures are too extreme, or would you implement them in every single public school? And also, do you have any other measures that could help the safety?
Look, obviously, we have an obligation to all the kids in our public schools, especially in high school, to keep them safe during school hours when they are in our care. Now, the imposition of metal detectors, magnetometers, is a reasonable way to keep weapons out of schools, but we've got to implement it better. Having kids wait in long lines for more than an hour to get through 1 or 2 sets of metal detectors not only degrades their education, but robs them of the time they need to get educated. We've got to do a better job than that. With respect to cell phones, I disagree fundamentally with the view that says kids shouldn't have cell phones in schools. I think that if I were still a parent of a child in a public elementary school or middle school, and that child had a cell phone, I'd expect to be able to enhance communication between me and that child. I think that's what most parents expect when they give their kids cell phones. Now, we've got to have measures to prevent them from text messaging and other distractions in their school day, but we got to keep them safe above all, and we got to work with parents to keep them safe.
And any other measures that you can think of besides these?
Yes. How about building new classrooms and new school buildings to relieve the vicious overcrowding in high schools in our city that degrades public education? How about attacking the 50% dropout rate that deprives half of our kids who go to high school of a future and a diploma?
Thank you, Mr. Ferrer. Mr. Agnew, about all these measures for safety, what do you think about them?
I think the first thing that we have to guarantee children who want to go to school and learn is that they're going to be safe in the school. And so you have to have measures that make sure that weapons don't get into school. But you have to be efficient when you're doing it. But most importantly, when you discover the kids that carry the weapons, I think you got to get rid of those kids out of school. To me, school is an opportunity, not a right. And if you're going to go to school and disrupt somebody else from learning, you have no right to be there.
So what are you going to do with those children?
You see, that my philosophy is that we had schools when I was growing up called 600 schools. And there are certain schools that you put the tough kids in where they learn they're not so tough. And you get them away from the other kids so that the other kids can learn. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it's not discrimination. Now, when it comes to cell phones in the school where I'm a trustee, kids can carry cell phones out. They can't use them during the day. If they want to use them during the day for an emergency, they could go down and see the dean, and we'll make arrangements for them to use it. As soon as they get out of school, they can use it. If they're carrying it around, they open it up when they're in school, we take it away for 2 weeks. So we have a policy, and I understand how to do that. But weapons in school is unacceptable. There's no reason for anybody to bring a weapon to school.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up, Mr. Ferrer. Would you agree of sending those problematic kids to a different school, separate them?
As you know, Juan Manuel, we currently do. There are schools all over this city that are set up and supposed to be set up for kids who are real problems in their schools, to create a safe setting for students who really want to learn and teachers who really want to teach. We don't have enough of them. And the policy that said, in fact, I heard this coming out of our Department of Education, I could scarcely believe it, said, well, we're going to suspend kids until the afternoon. That's essentially giving kids a day off. Out of school suspension, making it unsafe for them and unsafe for everybody else. That was a ridiculous move by the Department of Education. They should have been ashamed of themselves for even thinking about it.
Okay, thank you very much, Juan Manuel. And now we're going to mix things up a little bit. I can assure you of that. And we're going to move to the lightning round, where I'm going to ask you a series of questions. I assure you they can only be answered with a yes or a no. Okay? And at the end of this, if we have time, we will return to the second round of questions where you get to ask each other, and we'll just see how it goes. I will begin with you, Mr. Ognebeni. Yes or no? Do you like Mike Bloomberg as a person?
Yes.
Mr. Ferrer?
Yes.
Next question, beginning with Mr. Ferrer.
I heard my wife out there.
Have you...
That wasn't my wife, I assure you.
Mr. Ferrer, have you ever been fired from a job?
No.
Absolutely not.
And I want to emphasize, we're asking these questions to find out some policy, to be direct, but also to give us a sense of your personality. Now, Mr. Ognebeni, should the Nets basketball arena project in Brooklyn be allowed to take anyone's property through eminent domain?
Absolutely not.
Mr. Ferrer.
No.
Mr. Ferrer, should it be harder for landlords to remove apartments from rent stabilization?
Yes.
Mr. Ognebeni.
No.
Mr. Ognebeni, do you own an iPod?
No.
Mr. Ferrer.
No.
Interesting. Mr. Ferrer, are city private schools better than public schools?
No.
Yes.
Mr. Ognebeni, should a starting salary for a teacher be higher than for a cop?
No.
Mr. Ferrer.
Yes.
Mr. Ferrer, should New Yorkers be allowed to drink coffee in the subways?
Yes, I do.
Mr. Ognebeni.
Oh, absolutely. I wouldn't know what to do.
Yes or no, Mr. Ognebeni?
Yeah, absolutely.
Mr. Ognebeni.
Yes.
Is Donald Trump a positive influence on the city?
I could care less. No, I don't know. Yes.
Mr. Ferrer.
I agree with Tom's original answer.
And that is a...
And that is, I don't care.
Is that a yes or a no, Mr. Ferrer?
That's an I don't care. That's my answer.
So you're going to break the rules? It's yes or no, Mr. Ferrer?
I guess I'm going to break the rules, Dominic.
Okay. Well, hopefully you'll answer the rest of the questions. Okay. Mr. Ferrer, have you ever smoked marijuana?
Yes. Your turn, Tom.
Absolutely not, but I drank a lot of gin.
Mr. Agnabini.
Yes.
Should possession of marijuana for personal use be a crime?
Half my golf team would be gone. No.
Yes, but not one that lands you in jail for 15 years, for God's sakes.
Mr. Ferrer, would you perform gay marriages?
Yes.
No.
Mr. Agnabini, has the overall quality of life for most New Yorkers gone up during the present administration?
No.
Mr. Ferrer?
No.
Mr. Ferrer, is Ed Koch a generally positive influence on New York?
Not lately. There was a no in there, Dominic. Not lately.
Yes, Mr. Ferrer. Mr. Agnabini?
I would say yes.
Mr. Agnabini, is the Reverend Al Sharpton a generally positive influence on New York?
As we say in Italian, una di meglio. Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Ferrer, we have about 10 questions left. Mr. Ferrer.
He ain't going to be happy I said that, but that's it.
Should police officers be required to live in the city?
Yes. By the way, so should their supervisors, all the way up to 4-star chiefs.
Mr. Agnabini.
No.
What was that?
No.
No. Okay. Mr. Agnabini, is the firefighter hiring process racially biased?
No.
Mr. Ferrer.
The result sure doesn't give me confidence that it isn't.
Is that a yes or a no?
I don't know enough about their hiring process, but I'd have to say yes.
Mr. Ferrer, is the death penalty ever justified?
I think about the one
Yes or no, Mr. Ferrer?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Mr. Agnabini, should drinking be allowed at the beach?
Yes.
Mr. Ferrer?
Yes.
Mr. Ferrer, is fingerprinting for welfare recipients a good idea?
Not anymore.
Is that a no or yes?
That's a no.
Mr. Agnabini?
Yes.
Mr. Agnabini, has the Iraq War been worth the cost in money and lives?
Absolutely. Yes.
Mr. Ferrer?
Absolutely not.
Mr. Ferrer, should cab drivers be allowed to charge a gas surcharge?
Yes.
Mr. Agnabini?
I think that's fair, yes.
Mr. Agnabini, and we have 4 questions left here. Could you ever support garbage incinerators in the 5 boroughs?
Absolutely.
No.
Mr. Ferrer, should the Indian Point nuclear power plant be shut down?
Yes.
No.
Mr. Ognibeni, have you ever watched an episode of Desperate Housewives on TV?
No,
No?
absolutely not, no. The
Mr.
only thing that
Ferrer,
I watch that's racy and we enjoy, my wife, is Showtime at the Apollo.
Mr. Ferrer,
No, I don't watch much TV.
last question, beginning with Mr. Ferrer. Do you play the lottery?
Once in a while.
You do?
Yeah. Yes. Once in a while, yes.
In
Yes.
It, in it to win it.
Hey, $1 in a dream.
Mr. Ognibeni,
I do that scratch and match stuff in the newspapers. I don't know if that's the lottery.
so I'm trying to understand, is that a
I don't
yes
go out
or
and buy
no?
a ticket. No, I'm too cheap. I just like to scrape it off the newspaper.
Okay. So we are short on time, so we're not going to be able to go to another round of questions from the panel. But I do believe we have enough time for the final. No, I'm told that I don't have time now. So we have to go to the closing statements, and we will begin with Mr. Ferrer.
Well, I want to thank you all for having me tonight at this historic debate on the stage of the Apollo Theater. It's important that we be here. This November, we New Yorkers have a pretty clear choice about the kind of government we want. Now, in this mayor's world, multi-million-dollar condos are affordable housing, but not in the real world. In this mayor's world, the poor get better health care than the wealthy in this city, but not in the real world. In this mayor's world, an uptick in fourth-grade test scores gives them a reason to brag, but not in the real world, where 1 out of 2 kids in high school end up dropping out. In this mayor's world, hardly anybody works for the minimum wage, but not in the real world, where chronic unemployment plagues too many black and Latino men. No wonder the mayor spent all those years chasing the Olympics and a West Side stadium. In the mayor's world, there was nothing else to do. And that's why I'm running for mayor, to build a city that's better than that. Because if we believe that, there's an awful lot to do. That's why I want to build and maintain the affordability of 167,000 homes right here in this city. Help 50,000 more kids in our public schools get a diploma and get a future. Extend health care to kids and their families. And together, we can do that. We can build that kind of city that works better for every one of us. Thank you, New York, for letting me make my case to you tonight.
And thank you, Mr. Ferrer. Closing remarks now from candidate Tom Ognibeni.
Thanks, Dominic. And thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. I really appreciate coming here. It's been an exciting time for me. And I hope that I've made some points that would give you pause to think about what directions that we ought to take in the city of New York. I've been a lifelong New Yorker. I was born here in 1943, grew up with 2 brothers. We all achieved success by going to school and making sure that we studied hard. My mother was a school teacher and a principal who stressed education as the mechanism for us to succeed in this society, and that if we applied ourselves, we could do very well. My father was a painter. He worked very hard for the dollars that he earned. We lived on 139th Street between Amsterdam and Hamilton Place. And we became successful, and I love the city, and I've never left it except for the 3 years from 1967 to 1970 in which I did my duty in military service. Thank you. I brought up children, and my children live in this city, and I love this city. And I remember a time when people got along better, when it was easier to live, when things were more affordable. And I remember it deteriorating a little bit through the 70s and 80s, through a lot of causes which weren't the fault of many, but particularly had to do with drugs. And we got a mayor that came in that I argued with in the beginning and had confrontations with, but I believe that he had the spirit to change this city, and he did. He attacked crime. He attacked the growing problem and roles with welfare. He made this city a safer city. He made it a better city. He attacked the bureaucracy and the entrenched bureaucracy that seemed to refuse to want to make this city better. I thought that the person would follow him, Michael Bloomberg, would do the same. And Michael Bloomberg came to me and said that he had an epiphany, and he saw that this city could work and that we could have a 2-party system. and we could have a pluralistic society in which all views were heard. When he became a mayor, that stopped. He had no more use for the ideas that I thought made this city a better city and a safer city. He turned his back not only on those ideas, but the Republican Party, and that's why I ran. I'm pro-life, I'm anti-gay marriage, I'm for lower taxes, I'm for smaller government, and I'm for the kind of things that make this city a better city, and Mr. Bloomberg isn't.
Thank you very much, Mr.
And thank
Agnew.
you all here.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Now, that concludes tonight's debate. On behalf of New York One and New York One Noticias, I'd like to thank tonight's co-sponsors, New York City Newsday, WNYC Radio, and the city's Campaign Finance Board. I'd also like to thank the candidates tonight for attempting to answer all of our questions. And of course, we'd like to thank you for watching and the Apollo Theater for allowing us to use their beautiful facilities here. Now again, thank you and good night from Harlem.